So, Dr. Borba is an internationally renowned educational psychologist and an expert in parenting, bullying, and character development. She's spoken to over 1 million participants in 5 continents and is known for her TED Talk entitled Empathy is a Verb. Next month, she's speaking at the Global Leadership Summit with other experts from around the world. She's the author of 24 books, including Unselfie, Why Empathetic Kids Succeed in Our All About Me World, which Dr. Grundy, our director of elementary schools, bought this for our school counselors several years ago. When my school counselor shared it with me and I read it, we bought it for the entire staff. I was like, this is the best ever. And I kept copies on hand so that when parents came in throughout the year, I was like, you got to read this. Even if there's one takeaway you take, it is so worth it. And then when I found out that she was launching another book, I called her up and I'm so excited that she's here on our call today. So her next book comes out March 2nd called Thrivers, The Surprising Reasons Why Some Kids Struggle and Others Shine. It includes 7 teachable skills that set happy, healthy, high-performing kids apart. Dr. Borba organized the book in 3 parts to focus on strengths by category: nurturing heart, developing mind, and cultivating will. Each chapter defines a character's strength, explains the cultural forces that make it necessary to develop, and offers actionable strategies for how to teach it. Dr. Borba shares historical and contemporary stories of the strengths in action, brings in key research and scientific findings, and offers real stories from children talking about their personal challenges. There is an assessment guide to determine a child's superpower and areas that need development, and each chapter includes age-appropriate activities such as games to play, crafts to make, books to read, and movies to watch together, and topics to discuss, offering quick reference resources to reinforce each character's strength as the child grows from preschool to high school. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Borba. Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. I am beyond excited that you are joining us on this call today.
I'm beyond excited to talk to real life people. This has been, I know, an interesting time for us all. And thank you for listening. I just wanted to share with you just possibilities of what I'm seeing across the world. Actually, I've been speaking with not only United States and kids, but also the Philippines, Dubai, Hong Kong. Everyone's struggling and everyone's wondering, what do we do? So I just want to bring to the plate only my own background. I started as a special education teacher way back when, and I think I learned more there than any place else. And then what happened is right before the pandemic hit, something interesting began is that I began to see some very, very troubling trends about our kids, not yours, but the neighbors next door. And that is, we were seeing some unprecedented numbers in American children. And that is, we've never seen, this is CDC, American Psychological Association, AMA, stress levels that had gone up, loneliness that was skyrocketing, empathy that was nosediving, creativity. Faster than any other country in the world, our kids were going out. Now, they were also very smart, very well educated. We're doing one heck of a job. They're very well loved, but something else was amiss. The second thing I did was to start to interviewing kids. I swear, if you really want to know what's going on, do some focus groups with your students, get a diverse group of kids and just ask them, what are your friends feeling? And what they began to tell me was extremely concerning. We are the most stressed out generation, every kid said. My next question was why? And one kid nailed it. He said, I think we're being raised kind of like products, more about what matters to our parents is our test scores and our GPA, but we're missing the human stuff on how to be a real life person. Well, that just kind of hit me with, oh gosh, that sums up the why you're running on empty. Then the pandemic hit. So let's put this all together. I think if there's any silver lining, if there's possibilities of all the horrors we've been going through, it's for us to really rethink as a group of educators and parents. What does this generation going to really need in order to thrive? It's not just the pandemic. We know this is the first generation that even prior to this was being raised on active shooting drills because school shootings were so rampant. I live in California. Fire evacuation zones were coming up over and over again. It's uncertain. But I think what we need to do is do a kind of a different skill set. Relax. I'm not saying stop doing what you're already doing, which is teaching. But I think if we weave in a little bit different set, we're going to make a difference. And how this all came to be was very interesting. I started at University of California, Davis. That woman over there in that picture is named Emmy Warner. I think she's the godsend because she had the same question every teacher has always asked. How come some kids struggle and some kids shine despite adversity? We can't bubble wrap them, but somehow some kids are making it through the challenge and they still got it. We got it kind of an attitude. So what she did was study about 700 kids that were all growing up on the island of Kauai. And she studied them for 40 to 50 years. She studied the same groups. This is called a longitudinal study. Now, she knew that a large portion of those kids were growing up with very, very adverse situations, from poverty to sexual abuse to schizophrenic parents to horrors of horrors. But she said the most amazing thing is by teens, about a third of them were growing up to be competent, caring, and compassionate, despite it all. She called them invincible, despite their being vulnerable. And she began to see that resilience is not an inborn trait. Resilient kids are made, not born. It's not a process. It's an ongoing process, excuse me, but it's not a program. And one of the things that I think parents think about is hiring another tutor or just doing, some parents are actually curating adversity so their kids get overthrough. But Emmy Warner said there was really two things that mattered most. And here's your takeaway number one. And then from this moment on, say, which of these am I already doing? Which of these do my kids need in order to be a more thriving kid that handles school as well as life? Number one, she said, these kids have, prior to the adversity, protective buffers. They've learned some skills. They have a different skill set besides just knowledge. The skill set helps them. The second thing she said that was the most highly correlated is they have a you in their life. Somebody who's a caring champion who refuses to give up on that child, you have empathy and it reaps to the child. The fascinating thing is that teachers are beside the parent, the highest correlation of what helps kids get through adversity. So first, let's get a new skill set. Second of all, let's realize the kids prior to the pandemic weren't doing so well. They were lonelier, they were more anxious, they were less creative, and they were less empathetic. And then comes a crisis. But a crisis only amplifies a pre-existing issue. I'm saying all this because before you want to change, you got to have a strong why. Why should we bother? And so the next thing is, what should we do? Now, I'm going to give you a list of these, but I spent the next really 40 years trying to come up with this. I looked at not just Emmy Warner, but there was a number of very fascinating longitudinal studies being done on the field of resilience. And then what I did was take all the skill sets and say, okay, so which traits matter most? Which traits? And what I began to see is that 7 really mattered. 7 from birth till death, 7 that are teachable, 7 that are highly correlated to resilience. But let's get honest here. We don't have just time to teach resilience. What I discovered is that these same 7 traits, according to science, are also highly correlated to helping kids in the classroom. And each one's made up of about 3 skills. So what I just want you to do is look at how we can weave these in. And then you'll get a list of these. They're all part of a book that's coming out called Thrivers, March 2nd. But in the end, I think we educators need to get on board, because some of these things you're already doing in an SEL program. Some of these you may be doing in Socratic dialogue. So the ask for you is, which ones are you missing? Or most importantly, which ones do your kids need? I'm going to take 3 today that I think are the most highly correlated to what kids need to get through a pandemic. And that is empathy, self-control, and optimism. Because those are the 3 that the CDC says are tanking the quickest with our children. And that's why they are disengaged. They're having more and more problems in a classroom. The CDC says our younger kids are far more fearful than they were before the pandemic. Our elementary kids are a little more stressed. Our middle school kids are a little more anxious. And we have never seen, this is 2 months ago, more of our teens going to the ER visits for suicidal behavior patterns, unprecedented than any other time. Those 3 can help. What we're also going to do is not just do this ourselves. We're going to figure out how to get the parents on board with us. And all I want you to do is take out a piece of paper and write down maybe one or two things that you want to try. You've got a chat room there. Is something you like, or you say, hey, we're already doing this, try this, or here's the program we have on this, or here's a great piece of children's literature. We got to network, because this is lonely. And the more we get on board together and reinforce the same things, the greater we're going to make a difference on our kids' lives. So with that, here we go. These are boosting resilience. All of these are 21st century skills. They optimize performance. They're universal. I can go anywhere in the world, and these are still needed teachable skills. They improve mental health, and they are not fixed but teachable. And step one is, voila, you know this one because you've read empathy. And I still think that thing called unselfies and empathy is a critical one for pandemics. Why? In a couple of days, you're going to see a brand new report coming out from Harvard that's going to shake us all up. That this pandemic is really hitting our kids because of the isolation, and it's making them lonelier and lonelier. When kids get lonelier and lonelier, something comes, and it also will happen to you. So hang in there a minute, because we're doing the same thing. As our relationships and connection go down, what goes up is our stress level. Voila. But as that keeps going up, because you got to dial your empathy down to keep your stress in bag, burnout is the outcome. That's going on across the board. Empathy is teachable. We can cultivate it. More ideas are in on selfie, but I chose it as strength number 2 because it gives kids a sense of heart, and it is critical. Now, the first thing is, this is my Mrs. Fredrickson. She was my first grade teacher, and I still get heartthrobs when I see this woman, because it wasn't what she looked like in her bulletin boards that were turning us all on to life. I grew up in Silicon Valley. It's now Google 101. And I know you're not looking for her. You're trying to figure out where I am. I'm in the middle, the third from the right over there. I've got the bangs going through. My mom would put a plate on my head. But Mrs. Fredrickson did the coolest thing. She had rituals. And she reached out, she felt for us, but the rituals were ones we remembered forever. I think the most important thing to keep in mind on this pandemic thing is do one or two little things and keep doing them over and over again. Keep doing them over and over again, so that by the time the kid is done, the rest of their lives, they're going to remember, God, remember what Mrs. Fredrickson used to do? Or remember what you used to do? Certainty reduces stress. Connection with another person increases empathy. I know some of you are doing this social distancing. She'd stand at the door every day, or you'd stand at the beginning of the Zoom every day. And she'd start with just a simple little, hi, how are ya? That was an H and H, a hi or a hello. And the second thing is she'd take a moment to compliment us, but she always complimented us from inside out qualities. Parents who give the kids the scratch and sniff stickers and their trophy for breathing doesn't do a thing for empathy. It actually reduces it. Parents who actually emphasize the kids' character strengths increase the empathy. Thanks for being kind, Michelle, today, because, or that was really being respectful, Beverly, yesterday, because. The second little thing that she did is anytime somebody did something wrong in the classroom, she'd always ask, was that helpful or hurtful? Was that helpful or hurtful? Another H and H. She asked it so many times. By the way, that's Lawrence Kohlberg's cognitive behavior therapy approach to turning moral disregards to moral behaviors. Ask, was that helpful or hurtful? If it was hurtful, then what are you going to do to make it helpful? She asked it so many times that by the end of 2 weeks, every kid was turning to the other kid, was that helpful or hurtful? Takeaway number 1, kids remember rituals. What's the one thing you want to do at the beginning of every Zoom meeting? Or the one little thing you want to do when the kids walk into the classroom? Or the one little thing you want to remember to do throughout the day? It creates certainty. And if you do it the right way, it's also going to boost empathy. Keep on going. You've got rituals, and what you're doing is phenomenal. But every kid I interviewed said the stuff you're doing to let me know that you miss me is absolutely profound. The kindergarten teacher going door to door, touching the windows of each child. The parents were absolutely in just crying their eyes out, going, she really cares. I love what they're doing in this is Texas, and Friday Night Lights. They realize the kids can't play football, so every single Friday night they turn all the stadium lights on. They're now doing it every single night. The stadium lights turning on means I can't be with you, but we're thinking about you. What are you doing? Just to let the kids know I care about you. We miss you. Teens told me that one of the most powerful things were your handwritten notes, or your Google Doc ideas, or your email exchange. What are you doing? Because you've got kids that you don't realize are really suffering. What we do know right now is that because we can't get into our children's shoes, and some of you can't see the child and what's going on in their home, or even if they're in their classroom, they're not telling you what's going on in their home. Behavior is the outcome. If you could only get a little bit deeper in and understand, empathy starts from us empathizing with the child. What are you going to do to let them know you are concerned and you care? One thing that you may want to do as a staff, and I want to urge you to do this, is that when we continue to do Zoom, and I know some of you aren't and some of you are, but even if you're not, I would really encourage you to do a Google Doc as a staff. Nobody but your staff sees them. You list all of your students. And what you want to do with that is start listing the positive strengths about each student. I say that because the first strength that I discovered that was so powerful of a thriver is they had a clear understanding of who I am. Who am I? Not what did I get? Who am I? You need to know those so you can capitalize on them. You can point them out in that glorious moment. Maybe not to every single kid, but those kids are struggling. Hey, I hear you're a great soccer player. Or how did that turn out? How did it go with the music recital that you did? When they hear that you are interested and know about them, it's powerful. So maybe start writing down your kids who are struggling, or maybe list all your kids and then start listing a positive strength by each kid. If there's a kid that you can't think of a positive strength, that's the kid you better tune into, because that's the kid who's struggling. Other ideas, pass it on packs. I love this idea. This was a high school biology teacher. I saw the same thing at elementary age. That was Murray Elementary in Salt Lake City. I'll never forget it. One teacher showed me a series of, each teacher, elementary, has a pack like this. The pack is nothing more than one card per child. At the top of it is all the important stuff. But what you then do is every time you keep these right by your roll book, every time you find out a positive strength about the child, you put it on the card. Now, this will take you all year long to figure this stuff out, right? What they do at Murray Elementary is at the end of the year, they pass the cards on, they duplicate it. Next year's teacher, she's got the list of the grades, she's got the list of all the stuff that the kid's not doing well, but here's all the list of their multiple intelligence, what they are doing well. It's passed on and it's powerful. I'll show you other variation to this. My goal is to flood you with not starting with teaching the kid empathy, with us getting into the shoes of the kid, because they're struggling and they're hurting and depression and stress are going up. Reach out to the parents. I know you have, but one of the most powerful things that we can all do right now is let parents know we are concerned. There's a CDC household pulse survey that's free. Many schools are using this to just ask the parents, and it can be anonymously, what are things that we need to know to help you? What are you struggling with? And again, the anonymous could be powerful. If you've got a list of at least 3 things, that financial strife, or I'm worried about my kid, that he's just struggling so, or I'm so concerned about my husband. I don't know what it is, but it could be anything and everything. The first thing is, once you know that your kids are struggling, it's going to go up a notch. The second thing, I love this, what one school is doing, it's a personal email that's going out to each parent. It's going to take a while, but it's golden. And many often, the actual body of it can be replicated per one. And it's nothing more than, hi, how are you? I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about you. I'm concerned about your child. I know everybody's going through a tough time now. Is there one thing you'd like me to know about your child that would help me to teach them better? Take a moment, stop. How are you empathizing with your children? How are you finding out something that you don't know about them? How are you passing that on to one another so we can help those kids and not overlook some children? Just because their lawns are mowed really well doesn't mean that they're not struggling inside that house. We don't know those things. Let's figure it out. That's the first step. You may want to add one thing in a chat room, or you may at the end of this get together and go, what are we going to do to help our kids? How are we going to step into their shoes? Now, what they're doing, other ideas that I want to pass on, they can be middle school, but I think they're powerful for fourth grade on up, is you can do a personal email to each child, or you can do another month, nothing more than my one thing. My one thing is just ask each child, what's the one thing you wish I knew about you? Or the one thing that is your most struggling part right now, what is it? Focus groups. I mentioned that before, but they are absolutely mind-boggling. Principals, if you don't do focus groups, add it to the plate. At least once a week, get a cadre of different kids so that everybody has a chance to share. Zoom it if you need to, but your Zooming is nothing more than tell me what's going on in your life. How could we make those Zoom calls better? What do our kids need in the classroom? How many of them are scared? What are your friends saying? If you turn it to what are your friends saying? Oh my gosh, does that help them more? The whole goal on all of this is to start building empathy and that first piece of self-confidence by stepping into their shoes. Those are a few ideas. Writer's prompts could be another idea. And that is once a week. It can be nothing more than a 1-minute prompt on a whiteboard, in a chat room, in a journal, on a post-it, whatever whatever works for you. But prompts can be, what helps me best learn with Zoom? If you're doing Zoom, what's the best or the worst thing, my rose and my thorn, that happened to me this week or this month or during COVID? One school is doing time capsules. It's just a long piece of butcher paper that's going to be rolled up into a toilet paper tube, and they're all going to be buried. But first, every classroom does it, and every kid adds to it. What's the one thing I'll never forget that happened during COVID? It'll be mind-boggling for you to take a moment to read some of those entries. Then you can say, let's bury them. And when we all graduate from school in 5th grade, let's unbury them and review them. What you're trying to do is get cues of what's going on for the kids. There's lots of ideas. Put in a chat room. What's one more idea? That's a 1-minute writing prompt. Whiteboards I love. I used to do chalkboards, but man, they got messy, even for some kids like me who had allergies. But it's a whiteboard per child, and it could be on a Zoom as well. Write it, then erase it, but hold it, and it nothing more than a 1-minute prompt. Draw it, obviously, if you're kindergarten or 1st grade. Virtual connections, we're finding over and over again that you connecting with the kids virtually, what some teachers are doing, particularly 5th grade, if your kids have some kind of a phone or a text, which I'm sure they do. Certain networks like, I can't remember which one, like Sprint is setting it up so that you can get a different account, very reasonable, but it's only for you to have your kids text to you, not personal stuff, but text. Personal Twitter accounts, that's just our classroom Twitter account, nobody else is allowed in, can be a fabulous way to help your upper grade kids connect with one another. Do post for your teachers, their students, as well as your parents. How do we connect with one another? How do you stay connected? How do you let kids know you care? Those are the keys. I don't care how glorious your lessons are unless you can reach that child first, particularly those kids who are struggling, and let them know you're not giving up on them. Emmy Warner said the single greatest commonality of a child who endures such a trauma of this is you who refuses to give up on the child. Write down one idea. Let's keep going because there's lots of other ideas. Obviously, 1-minute conferences. I'm going to go through these quickly, but suppose you narrow in on who are the kids you worried about most. Maybe it was because of the Google Doc, or maybe it was little conferences every once in a while with other teachers who share your kids, or other grade levels meetings of always a 5-minute, just let's connect with one another. Who do you see that you're worried about? And then maybe it's a 1-minute once a day, 10 minutes, 10 times a day, or 10 times a week, or 10 times a month, just to connect. The connection, by the way, sometimes is nothing more than 30 seconds, but it's for the same kids. Emmy Warner said those are critical for some of those children. Don't overlook those kids. Take a moment right now and write down who's your kid you're worried about. Who's the kid you're losing a little sleep over? Some of you are going to run out of room in your brain because you're so worried about so many kids. Who do you not know enough about to make that judgment? Those are the ones we got to figure it out, because we know that we have this moment now before stress and anxiety start to build. When anxiety continues, anxiety goes into depression. And that's what the CDC says from very young kids right now who are really suffering. So your 4Ws and your 1H as a staff, you can do this later sometime as a staff. But my piece to you is when I was dealing with Indiana, and it was a big, big session. This is why the picture here, but I'll show you. Each of us had a few of these little plastic figures in front of us. The principal had bought dozens of them. And this was at a faculty meeting. He said, grab one in the middle and put it there. And as we're doing this session today, I want you to name one child who you think is struggling. Hold on to that kid or keep that kid in front of you, or you can put it down on an index card. And as I was Dr. Borba, as Dr. Borba, Michelle, is doing this session today, I want you to keep applying that idea to that one kid, how you can adapt it to that one child. Who concerns you? What are you going to offer that child? Who can help work with you? Custodian, the cafeteria worker, the secretary, the teacher next door. How are you going to help? How are you going to let that child know I'm not giving up on you? And when are you going to reach them? Particularly during Zoom times. Is there a 1 minute a day you can reach that child? The first step is let's figure out how to help that child. There's dozens of ideas. You know that once we get to that, we can always in our classrooms ask, how would you feel if that happened to you? What would you need in order to feel better? Those are all parts of Unselfie, and it's the great question. You can also do that when you're reading those powerful books. We do know that literary fiction is highly correlated to resilient children. Do you know that resilient kids have hobbies? They have something to backlog on. So during the heat of the moment, they have either a book, or maybe they knit, or maybe they like music, or maybe they do woodwork. Some of those hobbies aren't part of our kids' lives because they were so scheduled. Maybe this is the perfect primetime moment to make sure books are part of their lives. Books that help ignite their empathy and their heart. These are just a few of them. The teens say, and little guys say, are the ones that really impact them the most. We know that literary fiction, books that help us step into the shoes of another character, are the ones that actually, right here is where compassion is in your head, stretch that part of your brain. Not necessarily chapter books, but literary fiction. It's why Wonder is the best-selling book across the country right now for kids, because it's literary fiction. When I ask middle school kids, what's the number one book that you hope that your teachers always, always assign kids? The book was written 50 years ago. The Outsiders continues to come up. And I ask them, why? What's so special about The Outsiders? Inclusion. It makes us realize how we need to include other kids and how bad it feels when you leave kids out. The 100 Dresses. Oh my gosh, The 100 Dresses by Eleanor S. is incredible. About the little girl named Wanda, the Polish immigrant who was made fun of all the rest of the kids. All the rest of them asked her always, what are you going to wear tomorrow, Wanda? Knowing this poor child had really only that faded blue dress day in and day out. And she said, well, I have 100 other dresses in my home, in my closet. Mine is so tattered and torn, but I use it with every second, third, and fourth grade kids. They looked at her and said, really, Wanda? They started to make fun of her and make fun of her and make fun of her because they knew that she didn't have only one dress. There's a letter from the father on why they finally moved that just hits you so hard. And then when the girls, the ringleaders, walked into the classroom that day, after Wanda had left and the bullying had intensified, they noticed something about a powerful teacher. The teacher realized Wanda's pain. And what she did is she realized that Wanda had artistic ability, self-confidence. What was on the wall? 100 of Wanda's hand-drawn, most beautifully drawn dresses you could possibly imagine. Now the girls realized this kid was gifted, unbelievable, and guilt set in. Oh, I love it when kids feel guilty. Guilt activates empathy, shame reduces it. Was that helpful or hurtful? Said Mrs. Fredrickson. That's what we're looking for. Find some powerful books. I want to mention one other thing that I think is powerful too. When I ask kids, those focus groups, what's the one book every kid should listen to right now? Go ahead, write in your chat room. What's the one book we should be reading to kids over and over again? These were high school sophomores. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Gifted classroom. I asked the teacher, you're kidding. She said, no, I'm not reading Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day at the beginning of every class. I said, why? She said, because every kid said that's what we need. We need to know we can get through it, just like Alexander. Kids need empathy. They need you in their life, and they need you to not give up on them. One other little thing about all of this, and I want to mention this because I think it's powerful. One of the best ways to boost empathy in kids is to have them give back and do for another. When they realize somebody else is struggling, they realize, gosh, I'm not alone. These are what your upper grade kids are doing. And you've got some of these kids who are already in your school, and now they're in middle school or high school. They're called a Teen Corps, and I think they're an untapped resource. Here's what this group of kids are doing. They're helping you Zoom every day. You partner with the middle school or the high school. You ask some kids who've got that heart, or the kids who are struggling, can you once a day just Zoom in and maybe do a lesson or listen to some of my kids read out loud? It's going to help you and partner with that other teacher. What they're also doing is pairing. So the kids who are coming down as Teen Corps members actually graduated from your elementary school way back when. And some of those kids also had you as a teacher way back when. What they're discovering is it's one of the best ways to reduce the stress of the big kid and help the parents who are over the top right now with their stress level. Parent stress is higher than our kids' stress. CDC is extremely worried. Now they're trying to do the Zooms at home and help their kids do it all. Maybe the untapped resource is them. Let's keep going, because the first one is empathy. The second one is self-control. I'm going to keep going with it. I chose 3 of the traits, but I want to stop a minute and ask you to just think, is there one idea that you can just adapt it, weave it through, or go, we're doing that, or we forgot to do that. We used to do that 3 years ago. Maybe put it in the chat room. Maybe work together. Is it the note to the parent? I care about you. How are you doing? Let me know one thing about your child. There's a kindergarten teacher that's doing Facebook Live read-alouds each night with the kids. It's nothing more than a 5-minute read, and the parents are just basket cases with the tears going, she really cares. My kids can't wait to listen to her read out loud. What are you going to do? What are you going to do, Emmy Warner would say. So you are there, and make sure that kid realizes you're not giving up on them. Make it simple. Mrs. Fredrickson would say, real simple, and just make it a routine and a ritual. I chose self-control as number 2 on the 7 try-restraints, because self-control is what helps kids think straight and put on the brakes before those impulses set up. Without a coping strategy, our children are doomed. And it's one of the reasons their stress is mounting. Now, we do know, says all the work on resilience, that these are called protective buffers, or they're kind of like an armor, that they help not stop the stress, but they help the stress from mounting to the point where it's insurmountable and it goes to anxiety or depression. And what we're discovering is that many of our children don't know how to put the brakes on. So here's some ideas. These are ideas that you can take any one idea, because the best way to do self-control is take one idea only and keep doing the same idea a minute a day for at least 21 days, or as long as it takes until the kid can adapt it without you. First, 3 Ps, every question. So I know that this kid is suffering from low self-control, or I know he's struggling in the classroom. How do I know which kids are going to tank? Which kids are really going to be impacted? I call them 3 Ps. So here's the ones that you as a staff better get around and go, that's a kid we've got to reach out and connect with. The first thing is The closer the proximity the child is to a crisis. For instance, he was at 9/11 and he watched the planes go into the attack. He was by his grandma's bed when grandma passed away. The closer the proximity to the crisis, the more it amplifies. It doesn't mean he's going to tank, but that's one. Watch out for those kids who are really struggling. Right now, also watch out for the financially unstable parenting right now. We've got parents who really are hurting. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their businesses. That's impacting kids because stress mirrors down to the child. Second, he doesn't have protective buffers. He doesn't know how to reduce stress. He doesn't have that hobby. He doesn't have that protective person like you. The third one is interesting, and you can instantly write this kid's name down on an index card. Last year, you saw him struggle. Last year, you knew he was stressed. Last year, you knew he was going to the counselor. A crisis only amplifies pre-existing problems. Those are the kids I want you to start talking about. Those are the kids I'd say hold in your hand and keep thinking every day, what's the one thing I'm going to do to help that child today? Now, let's figure out some other ideas. First thing, maybe it's one huge chart per child, or maybe it could be a worksheet, but it also could be what one teacher did is trace the kid on the butcher paper. And what you then do over the next few weeks is have the child, each kid and you identify their own unique physical stress signs or emotional stress signs. How do you know you're starting to get stressed? You know, it doesn't done like that. You can feel it. You've got just triggers or you've got signs, and your body gives you warning signs. If you can feel those signs and know those signs before the meltdown or before the irritability or before you can't focus anymore, that's when you can apply the stuff I'm going to be teaching you. So what I'm saying is that every kid is different. There's no cookie cutter approach, but some kids it's reoccurring. My head hurts. You can watch them. They'll start to go like this. You can see some kids tuning out. You can see the stress level is too much, and most of the kids are, but you can see that focusing abilities are going down. Some children, you can see them start to go like this with their hands, or their little feet start to go back and forth, or they start to shake a little more, or they get a little more irritable. If you're doing in-class learning, some of them end up right next to you. They end up being clingier, or they're acting out, or they're a little more moody. You can hear the voice start to go up a little bit, or they're just a little bit more of a kid who's always, that's it, you're going to time out. If we could only catch the stress before the meltdown, that's a godsend. Now, let me go one step more because there's 50,000 ways to do this. But chapter 3 in Thrivers is all of these ideas, choose one. But what one brilliant teacher did is when she figured out, each kid figured out their stress signs, she rolled up the Post-it, she rolled up the butcher paper, whatever it's on, some kids had it as this big, some kids had it this big. She rolled it up and had each parent now look at it. Here's your kid's stress sign. Whoa, was that powerful. Number 2, feeling check-ins. We've got to give kids permission to share how they feel. If they can verbalize, I'm irritable, or verbalize, I'm this right now, or verbalize, in some cases, if you're doing Zoom, it could be a poker chip. Share me how you're feeling. It could be also a colored pen to hold up, or it could be a number on a scale of 0 to 7. How are you feeling today? Don't do them all, but what's your feeling check-in? In my special ed classroom, way back when, if I ever did something, I'd say, wow, that was really smart, Michelle. Why didn't you do that sooner? I made an old cardboard thermometer, and I just put a series of feelings there, and I put clothespins for each kid and me to put our names. We could clip on how we felt along that thermometer. Every day we do a feeling check-in. I didn't say anything about it, but I'd look and boy, was that my unbelievable, watch out for Johnny. He's not at the good level right now. But one day I walked into class a little bit late from running off the worksheets, and all of a sudden I saw all the kids plowed around one kid. Actually, my not so compassionate kids were trying to look like they were comforting. And I said, what's going on? He said, oh, Albert's having a really bad day, Mrs. Borba. We got to help him. And it was all because of a darn old feeling thermometer that by fluke I put up. Give kids permission to feel, figure out how they're feeling, and let them know. The second thing is find one strategy, teacher. I mentioned this one because I think it is probably the most used strategy now, because one school, Visitation Middle School in Oakland, California, did it, and it transformed the entire school and their business, and their behavior problems. It's a counselor who realized that these kids were really struggling. And the reason that they were not focusing, the reason that they were late getting there, the reason that they weren't attending was because their stress was building. So what she did, simple. She walked into every classroom and asked the principal if she could do a 5-minute lesson. When she walked into every classroom, she showed kids how to do slow, deep breathing from your tummy. Hold it. I'm so relaxed from just that one. Now slowly let it out. It's called a 1-2 breath. If you take an inhale, you hold it, and then you exhale, and your exhale is twice as long as your inhale, it's the fastest way to relax. If you do that maybe 3 minutes a day or 2 minutes at the beginning of each Zoom, it'll help unbelievable. What they discovered is that suspensions went down, behavior problems went down, but test scores went way up. Teacher said, we're not doing anything different. What the heck's going on? We're just teaching that 3 minutes a day of quiet time. What the counselor also did is have one kid video it. She then had that flash drive sent home to every parent, or she had the principal put it on the school website. Here's what the lesson looked like. She had the teacher who didn't maybe know how to do that 1-2 breathing the right way, put it on a PowerPoint drive. As a result, it made a difference. You can do the same thing with little kids. 1-2 breath, hands on tummy, inhale, exhale. What they're doing in that classroom is slow, deep breathing using froggies and turtles. So they give them a ride up and down, up and down. This was prior to the pandemic, obviously, but I'm telling you, within 3 minutes, half the class was asleep because they were doing slow rides. Don't go down so fast. It scares Turtle. He likes slow rides. Develop a positive mantra in a classroom could be wonderful too. I learned this from Navy SEALs, and it could be, we can handle this. We can get through it. We'll make it happen. It'll be okay. Please, teachers, I'm not kidding you. This is powerful. It counters the negativity. It's what they're now doing at University of Pennsylvania. Navy SEALs are doing the same thing. Maybe what you could do this week is have kids brainstorm. What are some kind of things we can say inside our head when it really gets tough? And then at the beginning of each Zoom, have kids keep adding to the list until pretty soon you vote. You can have your own personal mantra. I'm going to do, it'll be okay. But our class one, because the rest of the kids voted on, is we're going to find a way. And then at the beginning of each class, you start it. And it would be Mrs. Fredrickson. Let's keep saying the same thing until each kid finally develops it. These are just ideas that you can do of sending it home so parents become in a partnership. There's lots of possibilities. Take a moment, please, and write down one idea, because we've got one more. It's optimism, and I want to move ahead with it. But I want you to please go, what's the one thing we can do to stay on board together? The one thing, when I say together, your staff can be on board together. Is there one little strategy? The quiet time, you may want to consider it, because what they did at that school is they shaved off 30 seconds of each class, a little bit more off of, maybe a minute off of lunch, and they carved in 5 minutes a day of quiet time. As a result, that's how they got the change. Last one is optimism. And I think it's absolutely critical, because some of this is going to work for you, your own kids at home. If we continue to keep looking at the disturbing images, what we develop is pessimism. Thrivers find the silver lining. It doesn't mean they're Pollyannas. It doesn't mean they're Little Miss Sunshines, but they find a way to counter the negativity. Because if the negativity continues, it absolutely derails your children's reservoir for resilience. What happens is the pessimism begins to be pervasive and permanent, and they don't see a way out. And so they begin to feel helpless. Here's ideas, and I'm just going to just throw you one. These are all based on science. Every idea I'm doing in Thrivers, the book, is let's do science-backed stuff that we know works. And the first thing is good news. This is based on science. This is Jonathan Haidt, and what he's found is that if you keep looking at those dismal news of how many deaths there are today, after a while it derails us all. I would always suggest to parents, turn off the dismal news, but instead find good stuff about real kids. What many teachers are doing are a daily good news report. Some teachers are actually pasting them onto index cards. They are getting other kids to do a Google alert for Good News Google, paste it on the index card, and then maybe you can start the Zoom for upper grade kids. This is true. This is a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old sister. They're Philadelphia. They got so tired of the bad enough stuff that was coming up each day on the news that they finally said, enough is enough. This is making us feel bad. So they took their phone, went downstairs into their basement, and started doing a 1-minute video about good stuff that other kids are doing around the neighborhood. And they sent it off to some of their friends. Some of their friends showed it to their parents, and the parents said, would you tell those girls to keep doing those good news videos? The good news videos are going viral because kids and parents want them. The coolest thing I saw a superintendent do in Long Island, the high school kids said, we are so tired of the bad stuff that's hitting the news. Think about it. Watching live murders in front of you, watching horrific Capitol insurgencies, watching the police get absolutely slammed against barriers. It's so horrific. So here's what they're doing. They said, can't you just buy a great big huge plasma screen and put it in the middle of the quad? Why, said the superintendent? Because then you could, when we walk into school, it could be loaded with good stuff that's happening in the world. I happened to walk into that school prior to the pandemic, and all the kids were loaded around this huge plasma screen, and it was showing good stuff. Most of that good stuff was happening from the kids who were reporting it. You start the report. Here's another one. Elevating images have a contagion effect. If you're a music teacher, this is a gold mine. True stories, but each one of these alone can be a story that you do in your classroom. The true story is about the 2 kids who were so worried about the inbound neighbor in Ohio down the street. Mom, can we just go and do a cello concert? Because they love to play cello. We'll just be on a report. We're on our porch, Mom, and we really will do social distancing. So they brought their cellos. They started to play. Mom took a video of it. She posted on Facebook Live. It helped the inbound neighbor, but it helped the world because the Facebook went viral. Now kids from 3 states over said, I can do that with my ukulele. Other kids over I can do it with my trumpet. Kids across the country are now doing neighborhood elevating music concerts just to make people happy, but it also makes them feel happy. Anytime you can help your kids learn problem solving and brainstorming, I want you to just please take a look later on at the sheet you'll get on the skills for each of these Thriver strengths, because you're doing so many of these. That problem solving, that critical thinking, once kids feel like they have a sense of agency or control over their life, it actually boosts their optimism. So maybe you can put a great big huge chart up there, have kids brainstorm. If you have a problem, what can I do to solve it, until they can finally solve it on their own? It boosts optimism. For older kids, this is never going to go away. We're all going to die. Then you put the trauma in perspective, and you can do it actually 4th, 5th grade teachers with history. Have them study the World War I and the Spanish pandemic, or AIDS, or polio, or Ebola, and say, everybody had a problem. It was a crisis, but they got through it because there was an end in sight. Kids need to see the end in sight. That's what we're looking for. I did mention the student tutors, but I'm telling you, I'm passionate about this because I've interviewed so many kids who are now doing it. These girls who said, you won't believe what a difference it makes. We're going back to our old elementary schools. We're helping them, but it's helping us. It's giving us a sense that we can do something and make a difference. We've got myths of resilience, don't we? That sometimes too many people think it's another program, that it's part of my DNA, or it's that kid's temperament, or it's fixed. What we do know about resilience is that it's ongoing, it's teachable, and it creates amazing difference on a child's life. There's dozens of skills that make up resilience. The 7 traits are ones that matter most. The book is Thrivers, the 7 reasons, the 7 traits that are really going to make a difference on helping kids be a peak performer, but also build their reservoir for resilience. I think of all of those. My takeaway for you right now, because I also want to save some time for any of you who have questions, is back to empathy and not teaching it to the child, but back to empathy on how you're going to reach the child. How are you going to let them know that I'm here for you? And I know you're going through a tough time, but I'll never give up on you. It doesn't have to be 150 kids, but maybe it's that one child that's causing you a little bit of stress each night. You worry. The good news, as Emmy Warner said, you can make a difference, because if you don't give up, you have perseverance in a different way. It's your perseverance and your empathy together that makes the difference. There's one final thing I want to point out about these strengths that I never recognized, because every teacher was saying, so which one should I start with and which one is the most important? And I finally realized something. Start anywhere you want, but don't see it as one strength for resilience. See it as a combination. When I began to look at this, I realized that any strength is far more powerful when combined with another. So empathy plus curiosity multiplies it. And I call it a multiplier effect. It's just going to create a stronger, amplified, multiplied superpower. Integrity plus empathy creates a change maker. You put self-control plus optimism plus empathy together, that kid's unstoppable. This is, I think, the new reset model. There's a lot of ways that we can get parents involved in the process. I've sent an educator discussion guide for you if you'd like to get on board and have some book studies on it. Don't overwhelm yourself with it. Just realize this is an unprecedented time when we need to really think outside the box. We need a science-backed framework, but we need to see this as a process, not a program, and realize you do make an extraordinary difference on how your kids turn out. I'm going to turn back to you if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. That was awesome. When I came across her book, Thrivers, and started reading what it was going to entail, I was like, wait, this has to get into the hands of like every parent right now, because there were so many things that you were connecting to that are the real problems right now that people are like, so what do we do? And what's the answer for that? And at times it feels like we're coming up at a loss for that. And there were so many answers and opportunities in your book that I cannot wait to share some of this with at our PTA meeting tomorrow night. And for all of you listening, I'm going to start a book club with this book. And Dr. Borba, you said something about popping into one of our book clubs.
I'd love to pop in.
How many? How many do we have to have?
Well, at least 15 only, but that's okay. We can figure this out. And then if you have questions along the way, I'll pop in and say, hey, how you doing?
That is so cool. So I'm excited to put that out too. I've already shared that with our staff, and I'll share that at our PTA meeting tomorrow night. And I know we have 2 other schools and a couple staff from a 4th school joining us. So if any of you are interested, just shoot me an email. I'm really excited about this, and I'll just wait another minute if someone wants to throw a question in the chat for you. But also, Dr. Borba, I know you were saying, was it something about curiosity and your answer to that to help get kids more curious? Was it that we leave them alone? Was that right?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Tell us about that. That stopped me dead in my tracks. Go ahead.
Well, one of the most fascinating things that I was concerned about, that we all should be concerned about, is we want our kids to be curious. Not that they're going to be an Albert Einstein, but they're more open. And some of the neatest things I saw, as Thrivers will give you, each chapter has dozens of stories about real teachers who are doing real cool stuff, was Tinker Labs, where kids would come after school. They couldn't wait to get to the Tinker Lab because it wasn't a closed, this is the answer. It was, let me just be by myself and figure this out. And they were pulling apart computers that were old computers, or telephones that were old telephones, or they were coming up with, here's a question that I really don't have a clue about what the answer to is, so I'm going to work with my friend to figure it out. Oh my gosh, that's how we create these deep thinkers who really will make a difference. And that's the piece that's fascinating on curiosity.
That's awesome. Okay, we do have a question coming in. Would you suggest that our parents read this book and maybe participate in the book study?
Yes, yes, yes. And the reason for it is we're doing too much. And the more we get the parents involved with us, so they're partners, that we speak the same language, how much better that is for us as well as them. Therefore, I would say, for instance, maybe you want to do that 1+2 breathing. Great. If that's what you choose to do, then make the flash drive, then put it on the have your kid do the homework. So the kid has to teach the parent the strategy. Then they would be reinforcing the same thing that you're doing in the classroom. If you can put it on your website, it's even better. I would love that. I wrote this book for parents, but you know who's embracing it? Of course, it's teachers and counselors. But now it's like, hey, we're doing so much work already. We're going to maximize our own lessons if we somehow get them to the plate. The other thing I saw was in Japan. They have phenomenal networks where they have smaller cadres of parents. They deliberately, the moment the kid comes into the class, into school, maybe at kindergarten, they put cadres of like 8 parents together, and they keep them as often as they can. And then they do book clubs together. They do, there's an article in the newspaper. What are we going to do about it? Where's a good service project together? They reinforce you, and they also figure out how to help the teacher in the classroom, so they're allies. Yeah, I think we need to think outside the box.